Hi, good day. My name is Michelangelo E. Losada, and today we're discussing about the Mendiola massacre case, liability and state immunity. So, the Mendiola massacre case revolves around the tragic events of January 22, 1987, when protesting farmers led by Kilusang Magbubukid sa Pilipinas, or commonly known as KMP, were met with violence at Mendiola Bridge, resulting in deaths and injuries. The protesters were demanding genuine agrarian reform, but after failed negotiations with government officials, the situation escalated into state forces opening the fire on unarmed demonstrators. This led the victims and their heirs of the deceased to file a damage suit case, or the civil case number 884351, against the Republic of the Philippines and military officials, arguing that the government should be held liable. However, the government invoked state immunity, a legal doctrine stating that, quote unquote, the state cannot be sued without its consent. Article 2180 of the Civil Code and Article 16 Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution. This means that unless the government allows itself to be sued, citizens generally cannot be filed against it. The Solicitor General filed a motion to dismiss the case, citing this immunity, and the trial court agreed, dismissing the case against the Republic while allowing the case against the military officers or personnel to proceed. Both parties ended up filed appeals, leading to a Supreme Court ruling 84645 and 84607 General Register of the 846 General Register number 84645 and the General number 84607. While the government avoided liability through the state immunity, the case highlighted the responsibility of the individual state actors are under Article 32 of the Civil Code, which states that the government officials can be held personally liable for violating constitutional rights. This principle aims to prevent abused power, ensuring that even if the government itself cannot be sued, officials acting beyond their legal authority can still face consequences. Well, the incident also led to the creation of Administrative Order Number 11, which formed the Citizens Mendiola Commission to investigate the massacre. The commission recommended compensation for victims and criminal prosecution for those responsible, acknowledging that the use of force was excessive and unjustified. However, in the end, justice remained elusive as no one was held truly accountable for it.
Key points. The Mendiola massacre happened on January 22, 1987, when farmers and activists demanding land reform were fired upon by state forces at Mendiola Bridge, Manila. The massacre occurred during a peaceful protest organized by farmers and activists advocating for genuine agrarian reform. The protesters were marching towards Malacanang Palace to present their demands to then President Corazon Aquino. The confrontation resulted in the deaths of 13 individuals and injuries to dozens more. Several protesters were killed and injured, leading the victims and the heirs of the deceased to file a damage suit, civil case number 88-43351, against the Republic of the Philippines and military officials. The damage suit was filed to seek justice and compensation for the victims and their families. The plaintiffs argued that the state and its agents were responsible for the violent dispersal that led to the casualties. The government invoked state immunity, arguing that the state cannot be sued without its consent, based on Article 16, Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution. So Article 16, Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution explicitly states that the state may not be sued without its consent. This principle of state immunity is rooted in the doctrine that the sovereign cannot be sued in its own courts without its permission. The trial court dismissed the case against the Republic but allowed it to proceed against the military officers and personnel. The court ruled that while the state itself could not be held liable due to state immunity, individual officers and personnel could be held accountable for their actions if proven to have acted beyond the scope of their official duties. The case was elevated to the Supreme Court under General Register number 84645 and General Register number 84607, but ultimately, no high-ranking officials were held accountable. The Supreme Court upheld the principle of state immunity and dismissed the case against the Republic. However, it allowed the proceedings against individual officers to continue. Despite this, no high-ranking officials were convicted or held liable for the incident. Administrative Order Number 11 created the Citizens MENDIOLA Commission, which recommended compensation for victims and prosecution of those responsible. The Citizens MENDIOLA Commission was tasked with investigating the events of the massacre. It recommended financial compensation for the victims and their families and called for the prosecution of those responsible. However, the recommendations were not fully implemented and justice for the victims remains elusive.
Relevant article and civil codes. Number 1, State Immunity Doctrine, Article 16, Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution. The state may not be sued without its consent. This means that unless the government allows itself to be sued, citizen generally cannot hold it accountable in court. Number 2, liability of the public official. Public official can be personally liable if they violate constitutional rights, even though the government itself cannot be sued. Official acting beyond their authority can still face legal consequences. Number 3, responsibility for damage. Article 2180 of the Civil Code. The state is liable for damages caused by its special agent. If government officials act recklessly or unlawfully, the government can be made responsible, but this is rarely enforced due to state immunity. Historical background. After the Marcos dictatorship ended in 1986, President Corazon Aquino took office and promised genuine agrarian reform to address the long-standing issue of land inequality in the Philippines. Farmers who had long struggled for land ownership and better conditions saw this as an opportunity for change. However, when they felt that Aquino's administration was not prioritizing their demands, they took action. The Kilusang Magbubukid sa Pilipinas, KMP, a farmers' organization, mobilized thousands of farmers to stage a week-long protest near Malacanang Palace, the official residence of the president. Their goal was to pressure the government into fulfilling its promise of land reform. These protests highlighted the ongoing struggle of Filipino farmers for land rights
issues, whether or not the state has waived its immunity from suit, whether the Philippine government through its officials can be held liable for the deaths and injuries caused by state forces. This involves the principle of sovereign immunity, which protects the state from being sued without its consent. Liability of individual defendants beyond their official capacities, and the application of state immunity. Whether military and police officers involved can be held personally accountable beyond their official capacities. This concerns the extent of personal liability when state actors commit human rights violations.
Court's decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the state cannot be sued because of state immunity, which means the government must give permission before it can be taken to court. The court clarified that President Aquino's actions and the recommendations of the Citizens MENDIOLA Commission did not mean that the government had given consent to be sued. However, the court did allow the case to proceed against individual military officials and personnel, as they were acting beyond their legal authority. This means that while the government itself was not held responsible, officials involved could still face liability for their actions. And last is doctrine. The government cannot be sued without its consent, as it is a sovereign entity. This protects the state from constant legal challenges, liability of public officials. Even though the state is protected, officials who violate people's rights or act unlawfully can be sued personally. This prevents abuse of power and ensures that individuals and government can still be held accountable for their actions.
4. So, to cut it short, I made it much shorter and much more detailed in a way, or casual in a way. So basically, on January 22, 1987, a group of farmers, led by Kilusang Magbubukid sa Pilipinas, or commonly known as KMP, marched to Mendiola Bridge near Malacanang Palace to demand land reform. So basically, fairer land ownership is that it's what it means. So they wanted to talk to the government, but officials ignored them. So things got tense, and instead of just talking things out, the police and the military started shooting at the unarmed protesters. That's kind of sketchy. I mean, like, that's kind of, yeah. Right? People died, and many got hurt and turned into a massacre, to be exact. Yeah. So the victims and the families of those who died thought this is wrong. The government should be responsible for it. So they filed a case according to the civil case number 88-43351 against the Philippine government and the military officers involved. So, but the government had a sneaky trick up its sleeve, the quote unquote state immunity, Article 651 or 16 to be exact. Actually, it's 1051, so 16. Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution, this basically means you can't sue the government unless it says you can. So it's kind of, you know. So the government's lawyer, General, went to court and said, nope, you can't sue us. And the court agreed, throwing out the case against the government. However, the case against the military officers was allowed to continue because under Article 32 of the Civil Code, if a government official violates human rights, they can be personally sued. Meanwhile, President Cory Aquino created a team called the Citizens Mendiola Commission to investigate, and they found out the trial. They found out that they actually found three stuff. The military used way too much force. The victims should be compensated, and some people should face criminal charges. But in the end, no one was truly punished. The government walked away clean, and military officers got away with it.